Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Our topic today is the basics of ketones and ketosis and ketogenesis. Have you had your doctor or your dietitian or someone on TV tell you that ketones are bad and terrible and you should never have them and that you're going to die if you've got high ketones? Come and visit our website if you haven't checked us out. Please look at humanconditionlab.com to my website. Please sign up and give us your email so you can get a free ebook and so that we can be in touch with you in case the algorithm decides to kick you off or kick me off. Because I guarantee you if I disappear, I didn't do it. Please join us and book a call on Calendly, Basics of Ketones. I'd like you to look at this graph of ketones and ketogenesis. It's a graph that shows the numbers of lab values for ketones in the blood. And the first thing I want to show you is that the literature shows that ketones are not very accurate after the first day of a ketogenic diet in urine. So give up the idea of using urine strips to measure your ketones. Just throw them away. It's not going to be useful. Every professional in the field knows this, and we don't use urine for ketones and ketogenesis. We use blood. Now, the safest way to do that, usually diabetics will use their fingers and not their toes because they might have diabetic neuropathy. If you don't have diabetic neuropathy in your toes, then you can use your toes, and your toes might be more useful than your fingers and easier because they'll get a drop of blood easier. They're much lower than your heart. When you poke them, they won't hurt as much as your fingers. And I also advocate that you poke the sides of your fingers and toes, not the pad of your fingers and toes. And I like to rotate and go opposite fingers so that one day, if I was, let's say I'm doing ketones twice a day, morning and night, I might do morning, night, and then morning, night. And so that I'm never hitting one finger twice a day, and I'm never hitting the same side of a finger or a toe. Again, I'm advocating toes for most people that aren't diabetic neuropathic. What you're supposed to do when you've done this and you've measured your ketones in blood is there's supposed to be a range. And there's two different kinds of ketones that would show up in your body. And they're both ketones, but one is a lot different than the other. It's an amount. And that amount is about 1 to 3 units of ketones is the optimal range for ketogenesis and ketones for a person that's trying to burn fat, that's trying to fight cancer, a person that's trying to gain weight or lose weight on a ketogenic diet. All of these different purposes, whether they're children or adults, the ketone range, even especially for the most common reason for ketosis and the most powerful one, which is seizure disorders and epileptic events in the brain, is this 1 to 3 range. And that's very common. In some people that are not on ketogenic diets, their ketones will be mildly elevated in their blood or their urine, and that will show up on some tests, and their doctors and their dietitians will freak out on them. If it's between 1 and 3 units in blood or the equivalent in urine, it's not going to be a danger. It simply means that person is not efficiently burning their ketones. You'll see that in the Mosaic labs or other urine tests. You'll see markers in blood tests like ketones. You can buy these units for $20 at most pharmacies. They're just a blood strip that pokes your skin. You have to be careful to look for one that's not just a glucometer, but a glucometer and a ketone meter. And they cost about the same, about $20. You're going to need lancets and you're going to need strips, and each of them are $1. So each day you're going to spend $2 on lancets and $2 on strips if you test yourself twice a day. So that's $4 a day plus the cost of the meter. And most people tend to figure this out within about 2 weeks. So you're talking about $4 times, 14 days or so. Not a terribly large investment. When the person looks at these ketones in their blood, they're going to be aiming at like 0.80, 1.0 to about 3 units. And that's really the optimal zone for ketones. If you're worried about starvation really starts, after 3, after 4, somewhere in that range and goes up. And then there's another range called ketoacidosis, which usually occurs in people with quite an advanced kind of metabolic problem related to diabetes. And that would be ketoacidosis. And in ketoacidosis, the metabolism has failed, and the person usually smells kind of sickly sweet like rotting fruit. It smells like a fruit alcohol smell. It is a sign that their metabolism is very, very dangerously out of order, and that's usually over 10 units. So please don't confuse the under 10, really much more lower than 5, and the over 10 range. So certainly we don't want to be in the starvation zone, but we also don't want to be in the ketoacidosis zone, but we do want to be in the ketogenic zone. So please understand that ketogenesis is where you're burning fats primarily and not burning carbohydrates. And that means that your blood sugar could get fairly low, but you would feel okay if you're fat adapted. If you're not fat adapted and you're not burning fat very efficiently, you may get in hypoglycemia and be eating quite a lot of fat, but not be able to burn that fat. And those people tend to need L-carnitine as a supplement, and magnesium and sodium. They need those supplements to do better. They also, of course, can do another thing called the keto cheat. And the keto cheat is, if you're not very good at ketogenic diets and you're eating too many carbs, sometimes you can take a supplement of a powder called exogenous ketones. And those are ketones that you take orally instead of eating in such a way that you generate your own ketones, or until such time as you generate your own ketones. It's called beta-hydroxybutyrate, and it's basically a bad tasting powder that you can drink and eat, and it goes into your body and helps you cheat when you're trying to transition into ketones. Or in some people that have cancers or other types of problems, they're trying to change their metabolism. They're trying to burn ketones more than carbohydrates, and this can be a real good crutch for them as they grow closer to a fat adapted diet. Please understand that fat adaptation can take 12 to 14 weeks in an athlete. And you might take longer, and it may take some time and supplements and watching videos and learning and practicing and talking to other friends and being on and off the diet and having an occasional carb day. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do to get back onto a ketogenic diet. There are a couple of ways to resolve this, and I think the fastest way is to use a low carb or carbohydrate that's lower than 25 grams. The standard ketogenic diet is about 25 grams or less. Some of them are about 50, and some of them are under 20, but generally they're 25 or less. There are keto calculators. I've talked before about the website ruled.me has a calculator for how to do this, and there's many other calculators, but I happen to like that one. You need to know your body fat percentage and some other things about yourself and your activity level and your height and your weight and your gender, as I said, your activity level, and that can help you figure out what your macros are, how much protein, fat, and carbs in grams and in calories you should consume, and how to read your labels. When you do read your calorie labels, you want to look at total carbohydrates, which includes fiber. I realize that fiber is not terribly digestible, but you want to count fiber because we don't consider fiber good in the carnivore and keto world. Fiber is bad. We'll talk about that later. In some cases, you can accept pectin, which is fruit fiber, if you're on that diet, because there is a modified carnivore diet which talks about using fruit and honey. I advocate that for many people. Now, who needs that diet? Very often those are people that are highly stressed out and very adrenalized, where their adrenals are working very hard because they're under a lot of stress. They're also people that have a real tendency toward hypoglycemia. They get really hangry, they get really cranky, and when they eat, they feel better. Those folks often need to do a modified fruit plus carnivore diet, as Dr. Saladino talks about. I like that diet quite a bit, and very often people can transition away from that. I must warn you that also some populations that fall into this category are those that have sugar addiction or that may have emotional trauma, and they're really reliant on the chemistry of the carbohydrates to fuel their neurotransmitters, and they may need to deal with those issues with other methods. Meaning things like EMDR and counseling and working on issues and doing neurofeedback. You may even find that your EEG or QEEG changes, or your ERP, which is electrical measurements of brain waves, active and passive, change based on your diet. You might even find that some paroxysms or little bursts of episodes of short-acting epileptiform activity may disappear or reduce when a person has these dietary changes. Remember that there is no problem that is chronic that somebody hasn't beaten, and other people have written about and talked about it at great length. So if you've got a chronic problem, please find people that have beaten it. Don't listen to the medical dogma that says there's no way to beat this and it's a hearsay and it's all coincidental, or it's spontaneous remission, or it's just anecdotal information. You know, when clinicians treat thousands of people and reverse disease, there's something going on that's real. That clinician is no longer lying when they've done it for thousands of people. Remember too that we can vote by boycotting. Boycotts work. If you say no to products and you just don't buy them and you don't use services, those services will dry up and blow away. You vote with your dollars by buying things that you want to support, like organic food and clean labels and animal meat that is clean and organic and grass-fed and grass-finished, and also vote with your feet. Don't shop at certain places. Don't even set foot in those places if you don't agree with what they do. You can change the world and you can change your chronic illness. You just have to find your tribe, and we're waiting for you.